You've seen some of the breaking news. Christie is out of the race. I want to comment on this. I listened carefully to every word in his speech. It was contemptible. To bring up the Israeli hostages in order to make a cheap point and attack Trump, that's about as low as I've ever heard. And this is not a classy guy. This is not a guy that does give a damn about the country. He is an angry, ruling class, establishment Republican, given birth out of the Bush administration as U.S. attorney. And he is doing what establishment ruling class Republicans always do. Try to sabotage their opponents. I'll give you an example. In 1980, when the great President Reagan was running in the Republican primary, he already ran in 1976 against Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was not an elected president. He got the presidency by and through the resignation of Richard Nixon. He was a horrendous candidate. Good man, but he was fairly liberal, more of a Rockefeller Republican, which is why he chose Rockefeller. But he wasn't a man for the time. And yet the Republican establishment lined up behind him. Some of them are radio hosts today. Some of them are TV commentators today. Some of them still give advice on campaigns today on TV and elsewhere. You had to stop Reagan, an extremist. You had to stop Reagan. He couldn't be anywhere near the nuclear button, as they called it. I remember in my own suburban area outside of Philly in Pennsylvania, the Republican establishment that ran that town, back then Cheltenham Township, which is all Democrat now, of course. They told me over and over again, Reagan cannot win because I campaigned heavily and organized others to campaign heavily for Reagan in 76. A mere 19 years old, I guess. Less than that. So 76, they denied Reagan the nomination. And he came about 100, give or take, 100 convention delegates short. And after he gave his speech, people said, I think we made a mistake. But they didn't mean it. Reagan announces he's going to run in 1980. The same Republican establishment rises up against him. Bob Dole, an honorable man, a great hero. Bob Dole. George H.W. Bush. John Anderson. 6 or 7 of them trying to deny Ronald Reagan the nomination. And all but one of those, that would be Phil Crane, who was a libertarian conservative, all the others were ruling class, moderate Republicans, establishment Republicans. And the things they said, particularly the Bush camp, about Ronald Reagan were disgraceful. John Anderson decided to go third party. He was sort of the Adam Kinzinger of his day. But they failed, luckily. And Reagan got the nomination. Ron DeSantis is right when he said the other day that about a year out in the general election or so, when the polls were polling Reagan, he was 24 points behind Jimmy Carter. In fact, as our buddy Craig Shirley, the foremost expert on the Reagan presidency, dear friend, as he would tell you, actually about 6 weeks out, give or take, Reagan was behind. Prominent Republicans Like Mitch McConnell during the Republican primary had backed Gerald Ford, and he would not back Reagan until much later in 1980. Karl Rove was all in for Bush, as you can imagine. And it really wasn't until Reagan won the nomination that Rove threw in and pretended he was in front of the parade for Reagan. He was not, never was. How do I know? Because I'm a 76 Reagan guy and an 80 Reagan guy. Nobody ever heard of Karl Rove? Reagan was denounced. They called him stupid, reckless. He'd get us into World War III. As I've explained before, they called him Hitler. And there were individuals who gave speeches like Christie did this evening. This guy, Christie, like the others, is a self-righteous egomaniac. If you don't agree with him, there's something wrong with you. Fundamentally wrong with you and your character. And that he will do everything he can to stop Donald Trump from getting elected president. He's a two-time loser against Trump, isn't he? Lost in 2016, and he lost this time. Reagan won a massive landslide victory, even though we were told he couldn't, and he wouldn't. Massive landslide victory, even with a third-party candidate. He won over 51% of the vote, even with a third-party candidate. Bill Clinton couldn't achieve that. It always bothered him. He was always a minority president. Reagan's policies, we were told, would be very unpopular. The media and the Democrats attempted to paint him as for the rich. His economic policy, for the rich, slashing taxes across the board, for the rich, trying desperately to cut the size of government. Well, he did, but he could have done more. But for the Republicans who controlled the Senate and rode Reagan's coattails into the majority in 1980 and then served in 81 as a result of Reagan's landslide. But the rhinos are always the rhinos. The status quo is fine by them, no matter who runs it, no matter what's happening. Don't stir the pot. Let the Democrats and their surrogates run circles around you. If you dare to run unorthodox campaigns, if you dare to speak your mind rather than talk behind somebody's back, if you dare to take on the corrupt Democrat Party media, or take on the FBI and the CIA, or take on the open borders crowd, you must be destroyed. That's what they tried to do to Reagan. And before Reagan, they had to kill politically Barry Goldwater before he can get out of the Republican primary. They tried desperately. The same people. Led by Rockefeller, who Ford would pick. And Scranton. And Romney. Current Romney's father. That would be Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania. Big states. They couldn't tolerate Goldwater. They couldn't tolerate Reagan. And they can't tolerate Trump. It's the same people. Look, I understand Donald Trump is not an orthodox politician. He speaks his mind. Says things that at times cause people to cringe. Same could be said of Joe Biden, no? Obama and his hate America comments. Pelosi says most disgusting things, but they're all given a pass. It's okay, because they got to stop Hitler. Christie's campaign was an absurd campaign from day one. He'll return to ABC News and his buddy George Stephanopoulos, who, of course, is best known for trying to destroy any woman who came forward to tell the truth about that sexual predator, Bill Clinton. Stephanopoulos didn't have a journalist background, but they choose him to be a morning host and Meet the Press, where he declared this past Sunday that Donald Trump did commit an act of insurrection. Or they'll pick somebody like Chuck Todd, but his ratings were so bad they had to give him the boot. But Chuck Todd's still with us, Mr. Producer. I don't see him or hear from him. He's not even on MSNBC. You know, that's like that's where they send you. It's like a single A minors baseball. Another Democrat. Meet the Press announced that he will have no guests who dare to challenge climate change, even PhDs in physics. No, we can't have them. Oh, they're from MIT. We have some from Princeton. No. They're deniers, like Holocaust deniers. Like the Palestinians. Can't have them. They're deniers too. But they embrace them. That's a whole other story. Christie was never a conservative. Christie is not a truth teller. He ran a campaign to get even. He wanted to be Attorney General. He was furious. He had nowhere to go. And as a footnote, this is how I look at Bill Barr. I've known Bill Barr a while. I'd consider us in the past friends. He and his wife, who's lovely, would invite us to their Christmas parties. And Bill once told me he remembered me. I like to eat the food. No, that's the pot calling the kettle black, is it not, Mr. Producer? But nonetheless, my problem with Bill Barr is he waited until December to either be fired or resign, depending on who you believe. He'd been in the administration, give or take, for 2 years. He worked closely with President Trump. So all the things he says now on Fox and elsewhere, I scratch my head and I say, I'm perplexed, because this is a man you defended, this is a man you worked with and worked for, but all of a sudden you find him to be the greatest threat ever in the office of the presidency. You find him to be lawless. Suddenly the light bulb goes off and that's what you conclude. No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Same with Christie. He's buddies with Trump, governor of New Jersey. Trump is this big developer in New York, but also has his beautiful club in New Jersey. Christie liked the high life. Always did. Always does. Likes being around people of wealth, people of prominence. And then the light bulb went off. Suddenly, he's a never-Trumper. The funny thing about me, I am not one of these people who gets taken in by personalities. I really don't. In the 2015 and 16 Republican primary, I supported Ted Cruz, who's a dear friend of mine. I knew Cruz for years. I think he's tremendous. I also think he would have been a great president. He's a great senator. He's a solid Reagan conservative. That he lost the Republican primary. Fair and square. And then I endorsed Donald Trump after he gave his Gettysburg speech. People say, Mark, you were a never-Trumper. I was never a never-Trumper. I've explained that 1,000 times, but I'm not going to explain it again. But I was for Cruz. And then I backed Trump. Strongly. And I don't regret it. I don't regret it. He's done tremendous things for this country. At great personal expense. He loves the country. DeSantis loves the country. Trump has lost a lot. And he's now fighting for his very freedom in his life. Christie never had to do that. Nobody's ever had to do that as a result of running for office.